Okay, tonight we are actually day 5 of the pyramid of optimal physical performance, and we're going to be talking about hormonal balance. But before we get into hormonal balance, I want to kind of recap what we talked about yesterday. We talked about what it really takes to establish healthy habits. And I think the biggest thing that we really discussed was people really overestimate what they can do in the short term and underestimate what they can do in the long term. And sometimes people get, shall we say, overzealous with, either their goals or creating some of these habits. If you haven't exercised for a long time, one of the worst things you can do is actually say, you know what, I'm going to exercise every single day for the next 30 days or the next 90 days. It's better to set these small micro commitments or these small goals. So whether that's, I'm going to commit to moving my body, 4 minutes, 5 minutes a day. With water, of course, we want to drink half our body weight in ounces. But you might start out with putting 10 ounces of water at your bedside and making sure the first thing upon arising, you're drinking that water. So that's a kind of a micro commitment or a small, tiny habit. Anytime we can have a trigger, a habit that's already established, and then basically do what's called habit stacking, that's going to be very beneficial to us as well. So for instance, every time you brush your teeth, remember you can either take, 5 deep diaphragmatic breaths, or you can actually suck your belly in towards your spine, trying to get as skinny as you can, hold that for a 10 count, activating that deep spinal stabilizing muscle, that transversus abdominis. That muscle will actually help you shrink your waistline. It's imperative when that muscle functions the way it's supposed to. It's imperative for spinal stabilization or low back health. So some of these little things you can do. If you need to review the video that I sent out yesterday, go ahead and go through that because I think there's some really good points. But just a real quick recap is obviously start small. And then Jerry Seinfeld, remember, he used to try and write a joke a day. And he got to the point where he didn't want to break that habit. And so when we go through that, where we don't want to break the chain, so to speak, it can kind of give us some fuel to maintain that momentum. And the third thing is create a clear intention that you're actually going to create a new habit. For me, I tend to be a very impatient driver. I think, for the most part, a pretty mellow guy, and nothing really gets me too excited. But for whatever reason, sometimes I get a little impatient with driving. So here's my public commitment to be a more patient driver. So I'm putting that out there. So you might have to call me on that. The other thing is to celebrate your wins. So for instance, as silly as it sounds, let's say you get done brushing your teeth, you take 5 deep diaphragmatic breaths, you celebrate your win. Yes, I'm awesome. Whatever that is. So come up with a little celebration, and actually, I think it's good if you kind of, have a little chuckle behind it, because it's something that can really change or create what's called a pattern interrupt, and you actually start ingraining this in your nervous system. And it's important to really have these habit stacks and then celebrate them, because it activates the reward centers in the brain to make sure you stay committed with your successful habits. The other thing is design your environment to ensure success. I think one thing that comes to mind, if you maybe have a problem snacking late at night or after dinner, cut up some veggies, put them in the fridge. So when you go to the fridge or you're going to eat something, you go to those veggies that are cut up. It's simple, it's done, kind of takes the guesswork out of it, and you're setting yourself up to win. The other thing is, give yourself some sort of support structure, whether that's a friend, a family member, a group that you are accountable to, and a group of people that are going to support you on your mission to become a better you. And I think if you get around the right people, they're going to want to, of course, see you succeed. So just make sure you have a really good support structure. And then the last one is just making the pre-commitment that you're going to make sure that, whether it's you write it down on paper or you tell someone, make that commitment, just like I did with the commitment I made publicly to be a more patient driver. So make sure you do those things. And, if you have any questions or you don't really recall what was on the video or you didn't watch the video yesterday, you just go through some of those things. There's some key points that I think can really be helpful for anybody. So tonight, what we're going to be talking about is hormonal balance. And hormones are really dictated by, and they're really something that can be manipulated by our nutrition and our lifestyle. Now, there's certain genetic factors that are going to come into play here, but if we look at genetics load the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. And so there's so many times people look to lean on or make excuses because they're genetics. But, it has a lot more to do with your nutrition and lifestyle. So as we start to go through tonight and I explain some of these things, I want you to have a better understanding of really, and we'll be talking a little bit about something called scientific spot reduction. Does it really exist? So one of the ways to manipulate our hormones are by visiting the 5 doctors. So remember, the doctors are Dr. Diet, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Happiness, Dr. Movement, and the last one is Dr. Detox. So by visiting these doctors on a regular basis, we can actually significantly change our hormonal profile. A lot of times what happens is as people age, hormones start to shift, and then what do? They end up getting some sort of hormonal replacement therapy. And hormones are a very, very delicate thing within the body in terms of our chemistry. And anytime we're putting something synthetic in our body, there's always a reaction to that. Even the body is still going to look at things as a toxin of some sort because it, for the most part, is not recognizable to the body. And sure, you can push hormone-specific ways, but because of the delicate balance, the homeostasis that we have within our body, we have to be very, very careful with any excess hormones that we're putting into our body. So when we get into talking about spot reduction, say, there's so many people that still have the belief that if I'm storing more belly fat, so I've got, more body fat around my waistline, I can lay down on my back and do stomach crunches or sit-ups. Or if I do a lot of extra abdominal work, I'm going to melt that fat off my waistline. Well, I can assure you that will not happen. You could do thousands of crunches every single day and still not get flat abs if you've got a layer of body fat over it. So sometimes you'll hear, people talking about that abs are not really created in the gym, they're created in the kitchen. Some truth to that, simply because food has a very powerful impact on our hormones. And so there is some truth to that, but it gets far more complex than that. So let's take a look at our bodies. And I want you to think about this for a moment. If I looked at your body and I came up to you and I said, I can tell you pretty much what's going on from a perspective of looking at functional endocrinology. I can tell what glands or what organs may be stressed on you within, with a pretty significant amount of accuracy. So when a person is storing their body fat, say they store more body fat in their chest, or they store more body fat in their arms, those are androgenic hormones. So, for men, we're producing testosterone via the testes. For women, it's it's the ovaries, it's the adrenals, and it's in the fat cells. And so if you're storing excess body fat in the back of your arms or through the chest, so for instance, if a guy has man boobs, that's someone who has more excess estrogen. And so when a guy has more excess estrogen, his testosterone is dropping as well. If a woman has more body fat in the back of their arms, then we know their androgenic hormones are unbalanced. So we look at testosterone and DHEA. Now, that's one of the things, too, is when DHEA gets low, testosterone gets low, obviously that's going to play a role in our hormonal balance. And we look at today some of these statin drugs, these cholesterol-lowering drugs. Cholesterol is essential for the manufacturing of our sex hormones. So when we start to suppress that, that is significantly affecting our hormonal profile. So just remember this: where a person stores their body fat, if you look at yourself, where do you store your body fat? Where you store your body fat is receptor mediated. And all that means is there's a direct correlation between the functionality of a gland or an organ as it relates to that body fat storage. So remember, around the chest, around the arms, those are androgenic hormones. As we start to go down into our thyroid, so from the armpit down to the hip, right through this midsection, that mid-axillary area, that is our thyroid area. And so if we look at our thyroid site, another way you can tell if someone's got thyroid dysfunction is someone who stores their body fat very proportionately. So they've got it in their chest, their shoulders, their abdominals, their hips, their thighs. They store it relatively proportionately. We always know that there's some sort of thyroid stress. And one of the most common reasons for thyroid stress is actually heavy metal toxicity. And if we think of one of the keys to heavy metal toxicity, it's mouth pathology. So people that have mercury fillings or some sort of toxin in their mouth, whether that was from a amalgam filling, so there's mercury in the mouth, or whether that's from a dental crown, that can literally affect your thyroid within 1 minute of placing that material in the mouth. And that's why it's so important. If you go to a dentist today, really look for someone who is, not using a mercury as far as, dental composites. They're using other materials. And many of our clients have actually had to get their mercury out of their mouth because it was creating so much dysfunction with their thyroid and suppressing their thyroid so much. So that is one reason. Another reason is with the thyroid is plastics. Plastics are a big one. And today there is so much plastic in today's world. There's all these things, and plastics actually create something called xenoestrogens. So they're estrogen mimickers. And we are bombarded with so much plastic today that it is disrupting our bodies pretty significantly from a hormonal aspect. And so anytime you can use glass in terms of like food storage, highly recommended. But, obviously we're drinking out of plastic bottles. We have so many different variables that come into play here. So we have to be very careful when it comes to our thyroid. Another thing too that we'll see is if we look at the major meridians in our body, and if you go to this diagram that we posted, and we look at the symptomology, let's just say the symptomology is a suppressed thyroid. So we've got foods, we have immune challenges. So immune challenges can be bacteria, they can be viral, they can be parasitic, heavy metals, chemicals, emotional stress, but scars. You see scars here? So for females, it can be a cesarean scar, it can be a hysterectomy scar, it can also be an episiotomy scar. For a guy, there could have been an appendix taken out. There could have been a surgical scar from a hernia. So these scars, if we think of a nerve pathway, like a hose, and that nerve pathway comes to the thyroid, it feeds the thyroid, but we have a scar down in our belly button area. It's literally like that pathway. If we think of it like a hose, that scar would kink the hose. So think of this. If that scar kinks the hose, so to speak, or decreases neurological flow to the thyroid, is that thyroid going to function optimally? Think about it. If the hose is kinked, are we going to get adequate flow? No. And so sometimes we've had clients that it was actually an episiotomy scar, cesarean scar, hysterectomy scar. So we would treat it with either cold laser therapy, maybe wheat germ oil, sesame oil, DK3 oil. So the first thing we want to look at is, what does the person need to deactivate that scar? Sometimes the thyroid needs nourishment, right? Sometimes we have to support it with a specific supplement. And then sometimes we have to take the stressor, one of the stressors, off. So we have to evaluate what's stressing out that particular organ, the gland, or the body's nervous system, get rid of it, and then maybe nourish that particular gland or organ. So again, you can go to the doctor, and we've had so many clients that have gone to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, your thyroid's normal. Well, if we look at the thyroid and the profiles of what they're testing, it's a blood test, it's more of an end stage test. The parameters are very broad. And so what happens is, oh, you fall within the optimal ranges. Well, they've got no energy. Their metabolism is in the tank. They feel like crap. And they know intuitively that they've got some challenges. But the blood test conclusively says, my thyroid's in the optimal ranges. Well, that's where you have to be careful. I mean, that's the difference between conventional medicine and whether you're doing a hair tissue mineral analysis or you're doing applied kinesiology, some form of muscle testing. We use morphogenic field testing. So we can ascertain at the cellular level the functionality of a specific gland or organ. It goes much deeper. And the variables are way too complex than just looking at the blood. The blood is always going to be homeostatic. So the blood is going to do whatever it can to regulate itself. And so it has to be very, very dysfunctional before it can actually give us the type of data we need. But we can go much deeper, again, with a hair tissue mineral analysis or some form of applied kinesiology. So just remember this, where you're storing your body fat is really telling a picture of what's going on with your hormonal profile. So it doesn't matter if you want to lead with aesthetics. So if you want to get leaner in specific areas, then we have to take a look at the functionality of specific glands and organs. If you're like, well, I want to be as healthy as I can, a byproduct of that is you're going to lose specific body fat in specific areas. So with the thyroid, obviously the body starts, when it functions better, energy is going to go up. Also, sometimes women that have, or men and women that have suppressed thyroids, they'll start losing their hair as well. So all these things can start to reverse, and they can reverse quite rapidly. Sometimes these situations are multivariable, so there's not just only one stress. There's multiple stressors, and then sometimes we actually have to nutritionally support that gland or organ. So the next area I want to talk about is your umbilical area, or the belly area. So someone who has excess body fat in their abdominal region, that's excess circulating cortisol. So that's really our stress area. And when we talk about foods, sometimes foods can have obviously a huge impact on us hormonally, but sometimes it's not just what we're eating, but what's eating us. So meaning, all that emotional stress, years ago, thousands of years ago, you think about the stressors that people had. It was either temperature, it was either, running away from a wild animal or running to that wild animal in the case of hunting. And so there were things that stressed the body. But today we've got bills, we've got work, we've got all the electrochemical pollution, we have the chemicals, we have heavy metals, we have all these things that are stressing the heck out of our body, and things that they didn't have thousands of years ago. So again, the landmines, if you will, the stressors to our body are significantly higher. So when we have excess circulating cortisol, that can lead to excess storage of body fat around our midsection. It can also raise our blood sugar, it can raise our blood pressure, and it can also suppress our immune system. And so if you're someone who has a weak immune system, if you're someone who struggles with regulating blood sugar, like you have sugar cravings or your energies go up and down, you might have too much adrenal stress. And so where this gets really complex as a woman starts to go through perimenopause and becomes menopausal, what happens is the ovaries are not functioning the way they used to. And so what happens then is they start stressing out the adrenals. And when the adrenals become extremely stressed out, again, by all the other variables that people are dealing with on a regular basis, that's when women that typically never had any problem with body fat storage around their waistline, now all of a sudden they start having problems with body fat storage around their waistline. And women get so frustrated because, they're working out hard, they're eating maybe correctly, but they're not addressing some of these other variables, and it can be very frustrating. And for guys, it's the same type of thing because of all the stressors, again, we're dealing with on a regular basis. It's just men and women from a hormonal standpoint, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, it's just our balances are different. But the variables are very much the same. And so when we look at, again, where our body stores body fat, remember it's receptor mediated. It has a direct correlation between the functionality of a specific gland or an organ. Now, tomorrow I'm going to get into body fat storage in the hips and the thighs and some of the things that can actually decrease our sleep or create the inability to get good quality sleep. I'm going to get a little bit more in depth in some of the other areas of where we store our body fat. I'll talk a little bit about carbohydrate tolerance from a genetic standpoint, and then also kind of the love handle area that I'm going to talk about, and then the area around the shoulder blades. So make sure you tune in tomorrow. I'm going to dig a little deeper into, how, where, and why we store body fat and the delicate hormonal balance that we all have. I want to make sure tomorrow you tune in for that. And then also, if you got any tips or you found this video to be useful, please like the video, please share the video. And again, if you have any questions, please make sure that you go ahead and put those in the chat box. If there's anything that I can answer, I'll be sure to do that. And until then, until I see you tomorrow, be well.